Now, we have a very special segment because we're going to sit down with my colleague and friend Nick Tabakoff, who is leaving journalism to put all of his energy into his fight with cancer. Now, most recently, you would have known Nick's work through the Australian's Media Diary, but he's been doing this for a very long time. He has a gift for talking to people and a reputation for being able to get information from the most unlikely of sources. It is probably why he is leaving the industry with a treasure trove of awards, including 2 Walkleys and a Kennedy, and he's been honoured by the Australian Sports Commission. He was skillful enough to expertly cover business, media and sport, and his investigations were complex but made palatable for the average reader, which is a very tricky thing to do. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hi, Jack.
I've been trying to get you here for a little bit.
Yeah, I know. It's been a tricky time.
It has. Now, I was reading this article in The Australian, which I just thought was brilliantly put together about your battle with cancer. Yeah. And as well, it mentioned that you were rather quiet about it at first and you hadn't done anything like this. You hadn't spoken publicly.
Yeah, well, for a while, I felt it's interesting. You feel like you don't want to be out there talking about it because you want to protect the privacy. But obviously, it's here to stay. And I think now it's more important to get some messages out to people about how to deal with these sorts of things, from someone who's always looked at things from the outside but now is experiencing it from the inside.
Yeah, that's important. I've got a lot of questions for you about all of your work over the years.
Yeah.
And I want to start with one of my favourite because I just got into the Daily Telegraph and there was this ginormous 6'6" man, regularly with a bowl of broccoli, just sitting there, loudly yapping away. I don't know who was louder.
Used to be Raw in those days.
It was Raw in those days. But it would have been very shortly after I got there. You got this investigation out, and it was an absolute cracker. The Parramatta Eels salary cap scandal involving Jared Hayne, actually. It was going back and having a little bit of a...
Well, it involved a lot of the players and how they were getting paid.
Tell us about it. How did you come across this? And I know that we've spoken off the show and you don't want to give up. You're still very loyal to these sources.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, but the important thing is that you find out, it always starts that you find out a little bit and then you dig. And so it started emerging that this club was just riddled with cheating on the salary cap of the NRL. And the weirdest thing about it was they were still coming last, So as one of my colleagues once said to me, they were the world's dumbest cheats.
There was this, and it was getting very elaborate. And I think one of the, and this goes to just how complex some of these investigations are, which I love this story.
Yeah.
Because what they were doing, yes, it was very dumb, but it was kind of clever where you've got an athlete who is getting third-party sponsorship payments.
Yes.
But then the club is whining and dining the third-party sponsorship. It's supposed to be at arm's length because of the salary cap.
Yes.
And they were finding ways to get them into the board, get them into the games and everything.
And there were all sorts of hidden under-the-table payments that weren't mentioned on the record, and there were deals done on napkins that were kept, as I found out later. It was kind of, because it couldn't be documented, it was kind of hidden all over the place.
Yeah, and so when you come across all this stuff, and you know that you've got it.
Yes.
You've got the information.
Yeah.
How does the club respond to you when you go to them with questions?
Well, I went to the then chairman. I decided, because one of my pet hates is journalists who just go through email and email a set of questions and do nothing else and say, okay, well, we've covered off on that. I've emailed the questions. That's not good journalism.
It's almost like they're trying to cover themselves legally. Trying to acquire new information.
They're not trying to get to the heart of the story. So, of course, I rang the chairman directly and... and then, of course, you could hear the alarm in his voice when he realised, because I'd said where I was from and everything, and I said, have you been cheating the salary cap, basically? And the poor chairman of the time, who's now been long removed now, and Parramatta's now a clean club. But it is, you can hear, when you make a call like that, you can hear the panic. And a lot of the time, people talk.
I think journos sometimes are too scared
Yeah.
to make, maybe scared's not the right, but it's maybe the newer generation, it's the uncomfortable phone call of actually putting an allegation.
Yes.
And that's why they hide behind an email, because they don't have to have this socially awkward. But sometimes these people tell you things, and that's where you get details such as Jared Haynes, third party. You get that from digging and
talking. You have to work phones, and I mean, I do find it really interesting that, like, I've been to contacts, who have been in a tough situation, and you ring them and they say, "I'm not talking to you," but the thing is, people will often hit them, between the eyes with their biggest allegation. Whereas the best thing as a journalist you can do is to start just having a conversation and talk about, oh, look, I heard, and so you don't go straight to that. You say, and so you go to what they're interested in and you meet them at their level, and then you graduate to what the real nub of the issue is. But you have to build a trust. And so that means building a relationship.
It's tricky as well. And I think, sometimes when you're talking to a source or somebody who maybe is on the ropes that you are actually investigating, there is a skill in pausing and just letting that empty space sit there, and then people want to fill that space.
That's right.
They don't want to sit there, and even though they should not be talking.
Yeah.
And I do
it's
think
amazing. Sometimes they do want to talk, and the most important thing is you let them know you're not mean-spirited, or you're not there to
You're not unreasonable.
Yeah, you're not there to just jam them. You are there to, hear them. And I think a lot of journalists, they don't listen to the contact and meet them where they are. Sometimes you've got to meet contacts where they are, and then you evolve the conversation. That conversation where he said, "I'm not talking to you," an hour and a half later, he told me everything. That's another story from the Parramatta Eels.
And that's the lesson. That's how you win a Walkley. Now, your first Walkley, Chris Tyler, The Secret Life of Chris Tyler.
Secret Life. There's the cover.
I went back and had a read. He's this kind of cowboy Dallas.
Well, see, it was the year of the dot-com crash. You remember, they had the dot-com in the late 90s after the recession of the early 90s. Then there was this big boom in dot-com companies, and that was where companies like Google emerged. But there were a lot of cowboy companies that emerged in that first dot-com boom. And around 2000 was when the dot-com became the dot-bomb. And this story was kind of at the core of it.
Well, he was kind of being sold as Australia's golden child on software, and then you found out he had quite a checkered past.
Yes, well, see, Telstra had bought his company called Solution 6 as their big dot-com play. But what Telstra didn't realise, this guy was he was from Texas, and he was a big talker. And he said, "We're going to be the first company that hits $100, which was a big call in the late 90s. We're going to hit $100.
He got to 17,
amazing."
didn't he? Yeah.
Got to 17, and then my story came out, and
down it goes.
down it went. But the thing was, I'd found out that he was a drug dealer in America, and the amazing thing was, it was another conversation. I went and met him because he wasn't taking my call. So I went and met him at a function where he was the guest speaker.
It's those big talkers, they always do themselves.
So we had a beer together. So I'm Nick Tabakoff, and then before I know it, he's given me all the clues to...
just can't help it.
Because he told me all these companies that had been sold into NASDAQ companies, they were all fraud companies. And that was how I got to the drug convictions. So I remember at the press conference where he was reacting to this cover story, he came out and there were a bunch of journalists there, and he called me Mr. Tabloid. I always remember he said, "Well, Mr. Tabloid," and then I corrected him, obviously, and then he said, but then someone asked, "Well, how much drugs did you have?" He said, "Oh, a couple of garbage bags." So forever he became known as
this guy.
Two Bags Tyler.
But it's a great lesson. And look, investigations like this, and I do think, I loved the point you made in the Australian article about a problem that we've got with ideologically motivated journalists who are, they may be pursuing a story for the meaning that story will convey, other than the fact that they're tugging on threads and they're following a good story because it's just simply a good story.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a bit more about how this has changed activism
It has
in
changed.
general?
It has kind of infected journalism. And all I'm saying is with some of these stories that were big investigations that required your undivided energy, you couldn't be focusing on social media and getting these stories out. Like, this Parramatta story, I got trolled like unbelievably, but because I
fans,
didn't, because I didn't have a social media account, but I heard that on the Parramatta forums they were all calling, they wanted to throw me under a cement truck. Someone said, like, it's pretty nasty. And of course, I only heard about it secondhand because I wasn't obsessed with social media, and I just said, well, I've just got to.
You still shouldn't read the comments.
You shouldn't read the comments, right? But people with like 500,000 followers, and there's plenty of journalists in Australia who have, and influencers who are kind of quasi-journalists or whatever you call them, they have huge followings. And of course, their followings have become more important than their journalism, right? And if you are focused on your social media, you are never going to do the best possible job on your story. I think social media has a place, and it's very good for instant news where a story is breaking and you want to see like bystanders who've seen it. But in terms of giving your undivided attention to social media, that's where journalists stop being journalists. And then you see some journalists rooting for something to happen, and that's where you give up your impartiality.
Yeah.
And I think the story is paramount, no matter what. The story is paramount.
I agree. Speaking of young journalists, I do have a photo that I want to get you to react. Your two young daughters, draped.
Oh my gosh!
Now, I think that we're going to see at least one of them in the industry. They never stood a chance.
They never.
You're wrapping them in the paper.
I have one daughter who subs the Australian every Saturday.
Who's watching us just offside. I thought we'd embarrass them.
Hello, darling. She watches the Australian on a Saturday. Because Saturday she gets a bit of time because she's blowing over with homework and stuff during the week. But on the Saturday, she goes subbing the paper. She often scrawls on it. If she finds a community newspaper, there's a lot more errors again. She corrects them all. She is a frustrated journalist, and she loves business as well. She's got stocks on her watch list. She only has a watch, and she has stocks on her watch list on her watch. She doesn't have a mobile phone.
Well, she's welcome at Sky any time. Nick Tabakoff, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here, mate.